The wind bit through the wooden slats of the makeshift auction post, slicing past worn blankets and thin coats, carrying the smell of firewood smoke and horse dung. Snowflakes drifted like ashes in the gray Kansas morning. A crowd had gathered, not for cattle or horses this time, but for something colder, something meaner. "She eats more than she's worth," the man shouted, spittle flying from cracked lips, his face red from whiskey and winter. "Stubborn as a mule and twice as useless. Who'll take her off my hands?" Martha stood beside him, silent, wrapped in a thin shawl that barely reached past her elbows. Her cheeks flushed, not from cold but humiliation. She wasn't crying. She refused. Her breath trembled in her throat, but her back stayed straight. She stared forward as the men jeered, called out, some laughing, others shaking their heads. She'd been brought here like livestock, and now, like bruised fruit in a barrel, she was being offered to the highest, or any, bidder. No one stepped forward. One man tossed a coin in the dirt and said he'd pay that for the horse, not her. Another asked if she came with a barrel of lard. Her husband laughed along with them, slapped her rear like a sack of oats. The sound of it cracked through the air. She didn't flinch. 3 years ago, she'd stood in a schoolhouse in Ohio, reciting poetry to children with ribboned hair and dusty shoes. Back then, she thought her life would be quiet and meaningful. Her body had softened over time, not from laziness, but from heartbreak, the miscarriages, the nights without food while her husband drank, the words that cut deeper than any knife. "Too fat to be wanted, too plain to be loved," he said once, and often. The weight wasn't just in flesh. It was in memory. "Anyone," her husband bellowed again, raising a bottle as if in toast. "She can cook, if you don't mind burned biscuits. Got hips like a mule, though. Probably good for plowing. I'll take her." The voice came from the back, low and dry like rusted iron. Heads turned. A man stood leaning against the fence post, tall and broad-shouldered, wrapped in a faded wool coat and battered hat that had weathered years of storms. His face was half-shadowed, but the eyes, clear gray, were steady, neither amused nor ashamed. He stepped forward, rifle slung over his shoulder, boots crunching against the snow-dusted ground. Her husband squinted. "You serious?" The man nodded once, slowly. "You want to get rid of her? I need help. Fair trade." A few men chuckled. One shouted, "You'll regret it, friend. She eats like 3. The stranger walked up to Martha, stopping just before her. He didn't touch her, didn't inspect her like the others had. Just looked into her face. For the first time that morning, she met someone's gaze. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, lips dry. "Martha." He nodded. "I'm Elijah Booker. You're coming." The words weren't an order. They weren't even a question. They were something else entirely, an invitation. She glanced at her husband, who shrugged, already counting the silver button Elijah had offered as trade. Just like that, she was no longer his burden. She was someone else's mystery. She followed Elijah to a gray mare tethered at the edge of the clearing. He helped her mount behind him, his hands firm but gentle. She held his coat loosely, unsure where to put her hands. They said nothing as the horse moved into the open plain. Hours passed. The land stretched wide and pale, stitched with fence posts and brittle sage. Crows circled overhead. The silence was broken only by the creak of saddle leather and the sigh of wind brushing dry grass. She finally asked, "Why'd you take me?" Elijah didn't turn. 5 children. No one to care for him. "I don't have time for shame, Martha. I need hands, not beauty." His words weren't cruel. Just plain. Still, her face turned away. She wasn't sure which stung more, the honesty, or that she was grateful for it. They rode until dusk, the sun bleeding red behind bare trees. A small house appeared at the edge of a frozen creek, its chimney smoking, shutters askew. Chickens scratched in the snow. Fences sagged. It wasn't much, but it was standing. 5 faces peeked from behind the window, thin and dirty, eyes wide with something between suspicion and hope. The tallest, a girl around 12, opened the door without speaking. Elijah lifted Martha off the horse. "These are my young uns," he said. "Elsie, Samuel, Ben, and the twins." Martha nodded, clutching her shawl tighter. Inside, the house was plain, rough-hewn furniture, patched quilts, a table with one broken leg. The warmth was real, though. A fire glowed in the hearth. The children stared at her like she was another storm rolling in. Elijah hung up his coat, turned to her. "You can sleep in the loft. There's an old dress in the trunk. Not much, but better than what you've got." Martha nodded again, her throat tight. That night, she lay on a thin mattress, staring at the ceiling beams. Below her, the children whispered. One of the twins cried softly. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters like bones. She wondered if she had traded one cage for another. But then, she remembered Elijah's eyes. Not hungry, not cruel. Just tired. Just real. Sleep didn't come easily, but when it did, it came without nightmares. In the morning, she rose early, stepped into the cold kitchen, and began to boil water. Her fingers fumbled with kindling. The fire didn't catch. She cursed softly under her breath. Behind her, small feet padded in. Samuel stood there, a book clutched to his chest. He watched her for a long moment before saying, "You smell like smoke." She smiled, faintly. "Good. Means I'm trying." He didn't answer. But he didn't leave. Elijah entered moments later, tying his coat. "I'm heading to town. Storm's coming. Watch the place." Martha nodded. He looked at her again, eyes flickering just for a second with something like trust. As he stepped out, wind whistled through the cracks again. But this time, it didn't feel quite so cold. The storm rolled in 2 days later, flattening the prairie grass and smothering the sun in a thick quilt of gray. Snow came sideways, needling the windows and piling against the door like a warning. Inside the cabin, the fire snapped, and the air was heavy with the smell of boiled potatoes and smoke-soaked wood. Martha moved between the stove and the table, sleeves rolled up, hands calloused from 2 weeks of constant work. Her palms burned from scrubbing, her back ached from hauling water, but her eyes had begun to hold something different, purpose. The children still watched her with guarded curiosity. Elsie, the oldest, helped only when asked, never speaking unless necessary. Samuel kept to his books and stared at her as if waiting for her to prove herself unworthy. Ben followed Elijah outside most days, mimicking his every step. The twins remained silent, their small fingers always tangled together, like if one let go, the other would vanish. That night, as the wind screamed around the cabin, Martha laid out bread and root stew. The children approached slowly, waiting to be called. She nodded once. They Saturday. No one spoke as they ate, the only sound the tapping of sleet against the windows. Martha sat at the end of the table, hands folded. One of the twins, the boy, looked up at her and blinked slowly, like he was seeing her for the first time. His sister passed her a single carrot chunk from her bowl. Martha smiled. Later, as she cleared dishes, she heard Elijah return, boots heavy with snow. He stamped at the door before entering, rifle slung over his shoulder. Ice clung to his beard. "Fence lines near gone," he said, not looking at her. "If the cattle get spooked, we'll lose the rest." She dried her hands. "I'll go with you tomorrow." He glanced over, one eyebrow raised. "It's 3 miles of drift and broken wire." "I've done harder," she replied. Her voice didn't waver. The next morning, they trudged through the snow before dawn. Martha's coat barely kept out the cold, but she didn't complain. The wind slapped at her cheeks, numbing her ears. Elijah worked ahead of her, driving stakes, pulling wire. She followed behind, hands raw, breath fogging in the early light. Around midday, they paused to drink water from a shared flask. Elijah studied her face. "You're not like other women," he said simply. She looked back, tired but steady. "I wasn't always this way." He nodded. "Good." They said nothing more, and in that silence, something shifted, less like a wall falling, more like a door creaking open. Later that week, she found the twins in the barn, curled in hay, shivering. She sat beside them, wrapping her shawl around all three. She hummed an old lullaby, one her mother used to sing. Slowly, their eyes drooped, lashes heavy with trust. When she looked up, Elsie was standing at the doorway, arms crossed. Their eyes met. "I remember that song," Elsie murmured. "Ma used to sing it." Martha stood, brushing straw from her skirt. She had good taste. Elsie didn't smile, but she didn't walk away either. By the end of the week, the children had begun to follow her rhythm. Samuel asked her to read aloud. Ben brought her a broken toy horse to fix. The twins reached for her hand without hesitation. Even Elsie, slowest to thaw, began brushing her own hair again. Elijah noticed. He said little, but when he handed her the key to the food cellar, he did so without comment, like it had always been hers. One evening, as the sky bruised to dusk, Martha went into the woods behind the cabin to gather dry branches. The snow had hardened into icy sheets, crunching under her boots. She moved slowly, carefully. Then she heard it, a low growl, guttural and close. Turning slowly, she spotted it. A black bear stood no more than 20 feet away, its breath steaming in the cold, eyes fixed on her. Her pulse slammed in her ears. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She thought of her husband, raising his hand to her, and how she had stood still then, too. But this was different. This was not a man who thought her weak. This was nature, wild and indifferent. The bear stepped forward. She took a step back. Her fingers gripped a long branch near her boot, and she raised it like a spear, arms trembling. Then, a rifle crack tore through the air. The bear flinched, turned, and lumbered off into the trees. Martha turned to see Elijah lowering his rifle, face pale. "What were you thinking?" he shouted, striding toward her. "You could have been killed." "I was gathering firewood," she snapped. "The children needed warmth. There are ways to do things without risking your damn life." "And what about yours?" she shot back, eyes blazing. "You go out every day, half-starved, with that wound still healing, and you expect me to sit inside and knit socks." The fury in her voice stopped him cold. "I've survived worse than bears," she said, her voice dropping. "Don't you dare treat me like I can't carry my share." He looked at her, really looked at her, and nodded once. They walked back in silence, footsteps trailing side by side through the snow. That night, he brought her a mug of tea without saying a word. She took it, surprised by the gesture, and sat across from him at the hearth. The fire painted their faces in soft orange light. "My wife," Elijah began, voice low, she passed slow. "Cancer. Took everything out of her. Out of me, too." Martha didn't interrupt. Her eyes softened. "She taught the children to sing," he continued. "She made pie every Sunday. She wasn't loud, but when she was gone, the house stopped sounding like home." Martha stared into the flames. "I know that silence," she whispered. They sat there until the fire burned low. No more words passed between them, but when she stood to go, he reached out and touched her hand, just for a moment. In the loft, she stared at the beam overhead, where a small etching had been carved into the wood. Faded, worn by time. Her fingers traced it. Below it, she carved her own name, Martha. Not because she needed to mark her place, but because, for the first time in a long time, she knew it mattered.